The clinic's waiting room carried an eerie stillness. A stack of outdated magazines sat untouched on the low coffee table, their pages curling at the edges. The hum of the fluorescent lights above blended with the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching longer than the last. Sophia sat slumped in a rigid plastic chair, arms folded tightly across her chest, as if she were trying to make herself disappear. Her oversized sweater hung loose on her thin frame, sleeves swallowed her hands, and a lock of hair fell stubbornly across her pale face. She didn't bother brushing it back. Better to stay hidden. Her mother, Margaret, sat beside her, stiff and impatient. She leaned forward, speaking briskly to the receptionist with a voice that was sharp enough to cut through the silence. "It's nothing serious," Margaret declared, waving her manicured hand. "Just stomach pains. Probably stress or diet. She'll be fine." The receptionist hesitated, glancing from Margaret to Sophia, who sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor. The girl hadn't uttered a word since they arrived. Instead, she fidgeted with a loose thread on her sleeve, pulling until the seam threatened to unravel. Each time Margaret placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, Sophia flinched ever so slightly, shrinking under her mother's touch. The receptionist made a note, but said nothing, her expression betraying the unease she felt. Moments later, a nurse appeared at the doorway. "Sophia Anderson," she called, her voice calm, measured. Sophia froze. Her legs trembled as she tried to rise. Margaret, exhaling in irritation, placed a firm hand against her daughter's back and propelled her forward, guiding her as one would steer a reluctant child. Inside the exam room, Dr. Lawson adjusted his glasses as he greeted them. He had worked in pediatrics and family care long enough to notice when something felt wrong. And the moment Sophia entered, he felt it. The girl's posture screamed discomfort. She avoided eye contact, her shoulders drawn inward like a bird with clipped wings. It was Margaret who did all the talking. "She's been having stomach pains," Margaret explained quickly, "off and on for about a week. Nothing to be alarmed about, I'm sure. Probably just stress from school or some little bug going around." Dr. Lawson studied Sophia. She hadn't spoken a word. Something told him her silence carried more weight than her mother's words. "I'd like to ask Sophia some questions alone," he said evenly. Margaret frowned. "That's not necessary. I should be here." Dr. Lawson kept his tone polite but firm. "It's standard practice for part of the exam, just to make sure the patient feels comfortable." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Reluctantly, she stood, her heels clicking against the tile as she left. The door shut behind her with a hollow thud. The air in the room shifted. Sophia's shoulders dropped slightly, though she kept her eyes on the floor. "You're safe here," Dr. Lawson said softly. "No one can hurt you right now. Can you tell me what's been going on?" Sophia's lips parted. Her voice was barely a whisper. "There's something wrong at home." Then she froze. Her eyes darted to the door, and she shook her head violently. No, I can't." Dr. Lawson felt a knot tighten in his chest. Something was terribly wrong. He gently explained that he would be doing an ultrasound to check for abdominal issues. Sophia lay back reluctantly, clutching the edge of her sweater. When the probe touched her skin and the image flickered onto the monitor, Dr. Lawson's breath caught. There, unmistakable, was the outline of a fetus. Sophia was several months pregnant. But what struck him more than the medical revelation was the look in Sophia's eyes. They widened in terror, panic flooding her face. This wasn't the fear of a teenager who had made a mistake. This was something far more sinister. To understand how Sophia arrived at this moment, we must step back. Sophia had once been radiant, a girl with bright dreams of college, afternoons spent sketching in her notebook, and evenings laughing with her friends. She wanted to study art history, to travel the world, to capture beauty in her paintings. Everything began to change when Margaret remarried. Daniel came into their lives like a storm disguised as sunshine. At first, he seemed perfect, polite, attentive, a man who shook hands firmly and charmed neighbors with his easy smile. He attended church regularly, volunteered at community events, and was always the first to help someone move furniture or mow a lawn. To the outside world, Daniel was the image of respectability. But inside the walls of their home, his mask slipped. Daniel was controlling, authoritative to the point of cruelty. He criticized Sophia's clothing, calling her skirts too short or her sweaters too sloppy. He dictated her curfew, mocked her friends, and sneered at her hobbies. Slowly, the girl who once glowed with confidence began to retreat into herself. Margaret noticed the tension, but dismissed it. She was desperate to preserve the picture of a perfect family. He's just trying to be a good father figure, she told herself. But Daniel's control didn't stop at rules. His comments blurred lines that should never have been crossed. Compliments lingered too long. A hand on her shoulder felt too familiar. His eyes followed her in ways that made her skin crawl. Sophia withdrew. She stopped going to art club. Her grades slipped. Teachers grew concerned, noticing her exhaustion, the way she startled when someone stood too close. Neighbors heard arguments late at night, muffled voices, sometimes Sophia's sobs through the thin walls. Yet Margaret insisted everything was fine. It was easier to believe in the illusion of happiness than to face the nightmare growing inside her home. Sophia's silence became her shield, hiding a truth so heavy that it bent her spirit. And now, in a sterile exam room, that silence had cracked. Sophia sat trembling on the exam table, her knees drawn together, her hands twisted in her lap. The ultrasound screen still glowed faintly, the ghostly image of a fetus frozen in time. Dr. Lawson chose his words carefully. "Sophia, you're pregnant." Her face crumpled. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the cool wall. Shame, fear, and despair radiated from her like waves. Before Dr. Lawson could comfort her, the door opened. Margaret stepped back in, her eyes immediately narrowing as they flicked to the screen. Sophia's sobs grew harder. She lifted her tear-streaked face and choked out words that pierced the room like a knife. "You told me to keep quiet, Mom." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dr. Lawson felt his heart plummet. He looked at Margaret, expecting shock. But there was no shock on her face, only raw panic. "She's confused," Margaret stammered, her voice unsteady. "You don't understand. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Sophia's sobs told another story. She clutched her stomach protectively, rocking slightly as if holding herself together. Something terrible had been happening at home, and now there was no hiding it. The staff at the clinic had seen enough to be alarmed. Following protocol, they contacted authorities. Within hours, 2 detectives arrived, their presence calm but firm. Sophia, though trembling, began to reveal fragments of truth. Words spilled out in broken whispers. Daniel wasn't just controlling. He had crossed boundaries no stepfather should ever cross. And worse, Margaret had known. "She told me no one would believe me." Sophia cried. "She told me to keep quiet, that it would ruin everything." When detectives confronted Margaret, her denial came quickly, almost rehearsed. "My daughter is confused. She's just trying to ruin her stepfather's reputation. Daniel is a good man." But the more she spoke, the more suspicious she became. Her voice quavered, her eyes darted away, her hands twisted nervously. Sophia's silence, carefully guarded for so long, was finally cracking open. And once the investigation began, there would be no going back. The detectives cast a wide net. They interviewed neighbors, teachers, classmates. Piece by piece, a chilling picture emerged. A neighbor recalled hearing arguments late at night, Sophia's voice crying through the thin walls of their duplex. Another described seeing Sophia sitting on the porch in the early hours of the morning, knees pulled to her chest, looking hollow-eyed and lost. Teachers reported her decline, missed assignments, sudden absences, the way she jumped whenever an adult brushed past her desk. The evidence began to mount. Forensic testing provided the most damning proof. DNA confirmed that the pregnancy traced back to Daniel. When detectives presented the results to Margaret, her defenses shattered. She broke down, sobbing. "I knew. I suspected. But I didn't want the family to fall apart. I thought if we just stayed quiet, maybe it would stop. Maybe it would go away." Her silence had not protected anyone. It had only allowed Daniel's abuse to continue unchecked. As the investigation deepened, Sophia grew braver. With the support of social workers and counselors, she found the courage to speak more clearly, more fully. She recounted years of manipulation, moments of terror, nights where she prayed for escape. Daniel, meanwhile, denied everything. In his interviews, he smiled calmly, insisting he was misunderstood. "She made it up," he claimed. "She's trying to punish me for being strict." But the DNA didn't lie, and neither did Sophia's fear. The community was shaken. Neighbors who once admired Daniel's charm now whispered in disgust. Parents kept their children close, horrified that such evil had lived behind closed doors. Margaret wrestled with guilt, torn between protecting her daughter and facing her own complicity. She knew she had failed Sophia, and for the first time, she could no longer deny it. Sophia, for the first time in years, began to find her voice. The courtroom brimmed with tension. Reporters filled the benches. The case had captured public attention, not only because of the crime, but because it revealed the horrors that could hide beneath the surface of suburban normalcy. Sophia took the stand, her voice trembling but resolute. She described the manipulation, the threats, the fear that had consumed her life. Her hands shook, but she spoke anyway, her eyes fixed on the jury. Daniel's lawyer tried to discredit her. He painted her as confused, attention-seeking, a rebellious teenager lashing out. But every time he pressed, Sophia answered steadily, quietly. Margaret also testified. Through tears, she admitted her failures, her silence, her denial, her desperate clinging to the image of a family that never truly existed. Day after day, the truth unraveled. Testimony from experts, teachers, neighbors, and forensic scientists built a wall of evidence too high for Daniel to climb. Sophia's pregnancy was no mistake. It was proof of a crime that had been hidden in plain sight. After weeks of grueling testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Daniel was found guilty on multiple charges, including sexual assault and abuse of a minor. His sentence, decades in prison, with no chance of early release. The mask he had worn for so long was gone, replaced by the cold reality of his crimes. Margaret faced charges of neglect. Though she avoided prison, she was placed on probation and ordered to undergo counseling. Her remorse was genuine, but the damage had been done. For Sophia, the verdict was both painful and liberating. The weight of silence had been lifted, but healing would take time. Months later, she gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her daughter in her arms, she vowed that Grace would grow up in a home filled with love and protection. Sophia's story did not end in the courtroom. Instead, she chose to turn her pain into purpose. With the support of advocates, she began speaking publicly about her experience. Schools invited her to share her story. Organizations asked her to raise awareness about abuse and the dangers of silence. She became a symbol of resilience, a young woman who refused to let her trauma define her. Margaret, seeking redemption, supported her daughter's mission. Their relationship was strained, built now on fragile trust, but Sophia allowed her mother back into her life under one condition. Silence would never again define their family. Sophia's message to the world was clear. Silence enables evil, but truth, no matter how painful, has the power to save lives. What lesson do you take away from Sophia's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, if you ever suspect abuse, speaking out could save someone's life.